that together. And so that's what I suppose we started 5 years ago, really with a back of the envelope kind of waterfall chart. We've now gone through and we're deep diving into each of those issues, and the numbers are starting to sort of show that that deficit that was 17% has now been reduced to 4%, and I think the next version of this you'll probably see it go below, and we'll get even further than the target as well. So the point is, unless you ever put that target out there, you don't do the work to see if you can achieve it. So you've got to base your target on what you need to achieve, not what you think is actually possible at the time. And that's really one of the secrets of how we've been able to do as much work as we can. Is we had a Lord Mayor and a CEO who were extremely committed to this, and they really had I suppose the commitment, the courage to make those kind of commitments in the public domain and at the right time. And finally, greening our own operations. Look, you can't really be pushing these kind of strategies, this kind of vision, unless you really got your own house in order. Absolutely number one, every government department should be, they're the ones who should be committing to those green buildings to facilitate that green building market happening. They're the ones who should be leading by example. So this is the profile of the energy use within our own property portfolio. We have about 225 buildings, about $3.5 billion worth. We're about 40,000 or 45,000 tonnes of CO2 across our portfolio, and most of that is used in commercial buildings, and then the other third is street lights. And this picture here, if you're wondering, this is actually Lady Gaga using energy in the town hall. So just to have that picture. Yeah, it's not using water this time, but look, this is the water profile. So we've got parks this time. Buildings also use a lot of water, and but this time the parks is a big other user at 37% there. So as we talked about in the introduction, we are a carbon neutral council, and we started out, I suppose this is worth telling, we started out probably 6 or 7 years ago. The council wanted to be green, and we really kind of started from a low base, and so they said, what can we do now to at least get us started, because we know these projects are going to take years to kind of push forward. So the council made a commitment to buy green power for all our electricity. Green power is very expensive in the city, and so we did that for a number of years, but the accountants started looking at that cost going, that's a very big cost we're putting out every year. And so we actually changed our strategy, which is for that reason, for cost, but also for another a leadership position as well. So instead of buying green power, we then converted 5 or 6 years worth of that budget into a capital budget, and we've started to put renewable energy on our own buildings. And the reason for that is because we're a government entity, we own our buildings for a very long time. And so a 10-year payback on a PD system is not really a huge issue for us. We can afford to do that because those cells are going to be sitting there for 25, 30, 40 years, and after that for sort of 10-year payback, you're going to be getting free energy. So we've converted that into a renewable energy fund, a $12 million renewable energy fund. I think I've got a slide on that in a minute. But the other part to this was that there was a new federal government standard called the National Carbon Offset Standard. And really, it's great for us to say that we're carbon neutral, but we really needed some external verification of that. And so we were the first council to go through that, or first government agency in the whole of Australia to go through that process and gain that certification. And so we also have our own waterfall chart, and because we are asking the community to achieve 70%, we set the same target for ourselves. 70% reduction by 2030, whole suite of actions here. We were doing quite well in terms of energy efficiency for our portfolio until the council has decided to buy a few new buildings, which kind of put things out of whack there by 3 or 4%. But our targets are absolute. They're not intensity targets, they're absolute targets. And you can see here 2012 emissions was, the target was 20% reduction, so that was like an interim target. We achieved 26%, so we did meet that target, which is great, and we're continuing to roll out a suite of actions. And so I've just got a few slides on some of these actions, but the usual things you'd expect: energy efficiency, LED lights in our street lighting portfolio, and also fleet actions as well as local generation through solar and also through trigeneration. So our properties portfolio, 48% is the target for reduction. We're probably at about 40, 42, 44. But because of that new building we're building, or we bought, it's probably come down a little bit from that, but we need to come back and see how we can achieve 48% overall. LED lighting, we are quite different to many other councils. We own about 40% of our streetlights. Most of the other councils in Sydney, their streetlights are owned by the energy utility. And so this gave us a mechanism to lead by example. So we are converting and have almost completed the conversion of all of our streetlights. I think that's about 8 or 9,000 streetlights with LED streetlights, reducing the consumption by about 40 to 50%. So that's been quite a successful program, and really we're using that as a catalyst to get the energy network owners to convert the lights in the other councils and the rest of our lights as well. And this is, I suppose, one of those kind of examples where you've got good leadership within the council, in the Lord Mayor and the CEO. We do have good funding because we're a central business district council, and we use that position then to take these kind of positions, because if we didn't do this, the energy network retailer would have been sitting back waiting till the last minute until they absolutely had to do this, because they make money out of selling us electricity to power the street lights. So there's no incentive for the energy network owner to do this kind of project, but obviously there is an incentive for us. So we are getting good traction on this, and the network owner is now looking at how it goes about to retrofit the other hundreds of thousands of lights across Australia. This is the Renewable Energy Fund that I talked about. We've got $12 million in there. At the moment, phase one is about $4.5 million, about 1.8 megawatts. And we chose 30 buildings, and that was out of the 225, and that was really based on having suitable roof area, and also the buildings which had a higher energy use, because if we export the PV energy off that site, we end up pushing that into the wholesale electricity market, and we get a very low price for it, and therefore the value of the project goes down. So in order to keep the paybacks up, you put the PV on the buildings where the energy is being used. But that's one of the regulatory barriers we've identified, and we continue to lobby and work with the state government to try and get those barriers removed. And I suppose the other way we're getting around it too is that we're engaging an organisation who, a metering agent or an energy retailer, who can put meters on these buildings. And so if we overproduce on one building, we can take that energy use off the bill of another building that doesn't have PV on it, and all we pay is a distribution user system charge. So that has more value than getting the wholesale price, but it still doesn't give the true value of the energy, and that's really what PV is about. We really need to get to. Tri-generation, and we are looking to install that in our own buildings, and with our own buildings, use them as the catalyst for the networks. So if we're going to be installing Tri-gen at Town Hall, and our commercial building, and our main Town Hall there on the left-hand side, we could oversize that and use that as the starting of a network to put in insulated hot water pipes to the surrounding buildings, which you can see there, some of which we own, some of which are commercially owned, and actually start the seeding that network, actually building that network out over time. We also have all of our fleet. We have Priuses for all our pool vehicles. They've now been all converted to, well, majority of them converted to electric vehicles as well. This is an interesting one because the electric vehicles don't actually save us any greenhouse compared to the Priuses. The Priuses were doing pretty good, and these, because our grid is so bad, don't actually save us much electricity. But what we have done is increase the amount of PV that we put in our own buildings, which can then offset the electricity consumption of these cars. So I think the electric vehicle is the way to go, but you just got to be making sure that you've got the renewable electricity to drive them and make sure that therefore they're low emissions. And they, look, they're quiet, so there's a noise impact, and then also they have lower emissions in the city, so better for air quality as well in the city. I just wanted to briefly talk about climate change. I've just got a few more minutes before 11 o'clock. So that's sort of all the green infrastructure side of things, but also, look, we've got to be really quite honest about the impacts of climate change going forward. We've got climate change scenarios of, I think, 40 centimetres by 2050 and 90 centimetres by 2100 in terms of sea level rise in Sydney. And we've also done some climate change adaptation or vulnerability mapping across the city, and the circle there is obviously our city of Sydney LGA. The two big issues that we found, bushfire is not an issue for us, of course, we're in the middle of the city, but one of the issues for us is heat island impact. So yes, you've got heat stress on and that's got a physiological impact on especially the older and the more vulnerable parts of the population. But also for every degree increase in the local area, we'll probably see an 8.5–10% increase in peak energy use as well. And that's a really big issue also economically, because we have just gone through a huge phase of investment in New South Wales. I think it's $12.5 billion in energy network upgrades, and that's because of peak energy demand rising because of air conditioning loads being increased. And so it was an interesting conversation here that you've got a hell of a lot of residential that traditionally has been naturally ventilated. It'll be really interesting to see as economic prosperity increases over the years, whether people will go in and then retrofit those with air conditioning, and you'll go through maybe a similar scenario to what we have, where the peak energy demand goes up. And actually what's happened in the last couple of years is the average energy consumption has come down because of energy efficiency. So you actually end up having to pay more for your electricity because you've got more asset there but less electricity going through the network. So big issue economically and environmentally, of course, then too, because the greenhouse associated with all that energy use. We've also done aerial mapping. This is a heat island impact map of the city at, I think it's either 10 o'clock at night or 1 o'clock at night. And you can see the radiating heat from the different areas of the city. The roadway, of course, black asphalt is always probably the worst part of that, and so you get a lot of heat gain from that. But I've seen some really interesting models of this, not to use us as a case study, but in Hamburg in Germany, they actually use this, and you can type in your address on a website, go down to your house, and if your house is radiating heat because it's coloured red in this, that makes you eligible for an insulation rebate, and if we get insulation put in your house. So, this is the kind of thing with really good data and that you can really get some great programs going. We're not there yet, but we're on that path. And taking a leaf out of your book, we are really pushing for the canopy coverage targets across the city. And this is a really major way of reducing the heat island impact in the city. And also, it's just a good thing to do. It's good for livability in the city, good for the housing prices in streets where there are beautiful big trees is always more valuable than the streets where they're not. So there's an economic driver, there's a livability driver, there's a climate change adaptation driver, and a peak energy demand driver. So there's a lot of reasons why we want to green up the city. And so we have set canopy coverage targets now for the city. Not as ambitious as yours, but getting fairly close. So these were the 10 directions that I talked about in Sustainable City 2030 before. We've really just today concentrated on the leading environmental performance section, so the green part of that. If you want to know more, go to the website. There's a Sustainable City 20 website that explains a lot of the other actions around the different strategies. And with that, I think I'll finish up there. Thank you.
Or interaction, if you like to call it. Please state your name and organization before posting your questions or your comments.
Chris from SEI. Just had a question around how you handle the stakeholder engagement, especially when you're dealing with people like homeowners. I didn't really see too much of that explored. Do you want to go into a bit more detail?
Yeah, okay. Look, engagement, it's a hugely broad topic. So we do engagement at a very high level for major strategies, and that's a very different looking engagement than we do for the projects that we're doing on the ground. So at the high level, one of the things that we have implemented over time is a thing called City Talks. And these are public talks in the town hall. A couple of thousand people turn up. They're well advertised. We get international speakers and panels, and we talk, they're basically talks on particular relevant issues on sustainability or economic or social or cultural issues. And that's one way we do a high level engagement on those sort of things. With the strategy specifically, we then take a sort of staggered approach. So we do stakeholder engagement plans for every major project in the city. So we have a project management process in the city. So any project over $60,000 or any project that's cross-functional across the council has to go to an executive steering committee. As part of that, you have to have a stakeholder engagement plan for that. And so, look, I mean, it's a very, as I said, it's a very broad topic, but with a, say with, I actually didn't talk about it, but the energy efficiency master plan, that's one that we're developing now, and the reason we're doing it now is that when we started this process, a lot of energy efficiency was already being uptaken by many of the commercial buildings, so we're doing this now, and we know that we've got some experts in the industry. So what we've done for this one is that we've set up a stakeholder reference group, and we've invited 12 to 15 industry experts, and they're going to become a reference group all the way from the start of the project. So I've got them to review the scope of the project. I'm going to have a couple of them on the tender panel when we engage a consultant to help us. Then when the consultant comes in with the information, we're going to engage with them again. So we're actually really heavily involving them in the process all the way through, so that when the strategy comes out, we hope that that strategy will be well taken up and endorsed by the stakeholders. So that's one example. Tri-generation was a very different story. We trying to have a conversation about district energy in Australia was a really difficult thing probably a couple of years ago, because there wasn't a lot of knowledge and there wasn't a lot of expertise, and there was some strong opinions, probably not that well informed as well. So we actually took an approach to, let's just do the work and do the analysis and really spend the hours on getting the strategy right and bringing it to the surface. And so we took a very, we sort of brought it to the industry, then we had the conversation because we actually had something to discuss then. So it really depends on the topic and on the spread of the issue, how we approach it. But look, it's one of the major cornerstones of the platform of how the Lord Mayor has been re-elected. She's really well known and respected for her ability to engage, and that's look, she got re-elected once with an even bigger majority than she did previously, and then again a second time, again for the same reason. And so she's a very loved politician for mainly that reason, for her ability to engage. So it's an important part.
My name is Stephanie Richards, and I work at a consulting group here in Singapore. My question was regarding, it seems like you've made some really dramatic improvements in your the energy efficiency of your government buildings. Have you done any cost-benefit analysis to show how much cost savings you can achieve with your electricity bills as a result of the investments that you're making in your government buildings? And where can we find that if it's available?
Look, the energy efficiency we've done a couple. The journeys have made some major components. So the first, we started out doing our own projects. So with lots of low-hanging fruit, we engage a consultant to do an assessment of some of the buildings. We get a scope of works. We employ a design and construction company, and they come in and do some of those works. That got us about 80% efficiency, and that was probably the low-hanging fruit. We then decided, look, that's kind of getting beyond our expertise, and also we have a big enough portfolio to get economies of scale. So we then defined an output specification for an energy performance contract. So we said we wanted another 23% reduction in greenhouse gas emissions through energy efficiency across our portfolio. We put all our buildings in the portfolio. We just put the targets in the tender, and we went out to industry basically and got an energy performance contract. Those works that are happening have just been completed towards the end of last year, and we're now going through the monitoring and verification stage of those works. So we're taking different approaches. I would say that on the average across all of that, we have about a 6-year payback across that 6.5-year payback. That's probably the best indicator I can give you. And we are preparing more detailed information that we will have on our website soon. It's not there yet, of the whole, more detail about all the actions we undertook and the detailed economic analysis. Similarly with PV is probably a little longer. That's about 8-year payback. And the other one was the LED lights, and the LED lights is in the order of 7 to 8 years as well. So many of these sort of programs are in that kind of ballpark, 6 to 8 years. Yeah. And that's because some of the actions are really quick. They're 6-month paybacks and those kind of things. But we did take a portfolio approach because we wanted deeper cuts, and that's the trick when if you just pick off the low-hanging fruit, you pick out all the stuff that makes the more difficult things look more attractive if you were to put them all together in a portfolio and look at them as a holistic problem.
I'm sorry, may I ask a follow-up question
Yeah.
related to that?